Thanks, Gregor. Morning, Paul. We talked about experience going into this series. How does having been in the same situation as the Oilers were back in 2019, where you lost the first two, help prepare you to what you're going to get in response from your opponent and how you need to play in order to try to get this to 3-0?
Yeah, in some ways, the shift of kind of focus. There's almost an advantage to the team that's down two. It's not so much desperation, but I think you get into any playoff game, there's the balance there between trying to score goals and push that envelope, and you want to be careful, right? You don't want to give things up, and that fear of giving something up lessens for the team that's down two, so they get to come and push harder. So I think that there's the advantage that goes to them on that. And then, you want to be careful that you don't get up two, and it's not a casualness. It's just, you feel like now you have to protect the two wins and you come off it. So we want to get back to, we still think there's a bunch of places in our game that we can improve. We've been pretty good in a few areas. These are 1-goal games, right? Both of them, they're very, very close. So just be mentally prepared for that.
Go next to Paul Friesen from the Winnipeg Sun. Go ahead, Paul.
Paul, apologize if you were asked this last night about Dylan DeMelo's hand block there, but I was scrambling to meet deadline and didn't hear you.
Yeah.
But what did you think of that? First of all, did you see it, and what was going through your mind as you saw it, and what is it emblematic of? I guess
it's emblematic of the value of all players. Right. And this is not a shot against the media in any, but over the course of the season, we always talk about the scorers, right? The offensive players. Those are the guys that get noticed. And then when you get into the playoffs, that is no different than almost an end-to-end rush where a guy scores a goal, right? It's such a huge play in the game that has major impacts. They're 1-goal games, so it's a huge play. And now those guys get to be a part of that spotlight and get to be, and it's not even in the newspaper, right? It's in the locker room. Those guys get to walk around and, there's a game changer. There's a game changer. That guy made that play. And I think they get, there's a different kind of respect in a locker room in the playoffs for guys that are making those plays.
Go next to Ted Wyman from the Sun. Go ahead, Ted.
Hey, Paul, can you put a value on what Paul Stastny has meant to this team from the minute he was traded here before the season?
Just a veteran guy that settles things down. And so much of it isn't easily noticed by the way he plays. It's the guy that Paul has always reminded me was Ron Francis. Right? So smart, so positionally right, able to process the game for a guy that doesn't have blinding speed but can get to the right spot. So much of what he did is subtle. And then the maturity in the locker room, the perspective in the locker room at 1,000 games. He's one of those guys that reaches out to everybody in the room. So no, I mean, he's been really, really important in that kind of, we've just been a very, very young team for a long time. And there's a lot of young habits that come with that, and we just matured a little bit, and Paul being here has brought a lot of that maturity.
We'll go next to Jason Bell from the Winnipeg Free Press. Go ahead, Jason.
Thanks, Gregor. Hi, Paul. You look at the minutes of your club last night, and it was really balanced, and that's obviously something that you've been trying to work towards all season, and that's a byproduct of having so much trust in that fourth line. And I mean, how much of a benefit is that going to have when you're not running guys the 30 minutes like, Dave did last night in a lot of results?
For Edmonton, it's not as big an issue because those guys are used to those minutes, right? They can play those minutes. This is maybe the most unusual bench that you'd have to run in the playoffs. From my point of view, you've got a match and you got a pretty good idea of when they're coming out. But they'll come out in the 3-hole almost all the time, right? They'll come out first in line. They'll come out after a second shift, after a third shift. So you're going to get situations. I think we had 4 of them last night where Thompson's line's out against McDavid. And, we didn't break anything loose, but neither did they. that's critical, because it's not the shifts that you get right on the bench. If you're hiding your fourth line a little bit, the problem is that sometimes you'll hold your fourth line because you think they're coming out with their number one. So you go back to the top of your rotation. So you put your number one out and they don't. And now you get a real problem. So having a fourth line that can defend lets you, as the guy changing the forwards, be wrong every once in a while. And it's maybe wrong's not the way. You just didn't get the change right. They came out with it in a different rotation. It's a bit of a security blanket on the bench.
We'll go next to Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Sean.
Thanks, Gregor. Hey, Paul. You talked about heading into that game too, that your team had some tweaks to make, a little bit of instruction. I'm interested in how you see your team taking that instruction at this stage of the season. I guess another way of asking it is the focus they're showing on the details you're asking them to pay attention to.
Yeah, we're really good, but there's small adjustments that you want to make in the game, but you never want to make that the main focus. The big pieces for us, we've been working on it for a while, and yeah, they've been good at it. Like we haven't turned a lot of pucks over. We've been pretty diligent with that, and that's not just against the Edmonton Oilers. That's true of all the teams in the playoffs. You just can't turn pucks over because they're almost all 1-goal games at one point, right? And that's where the game changes. So we've been in 2 really, really tight games, and each team has a chance to score. So it's going to be a detail, and it's going to be an execution, and it's going to be all about the players at that point. So, you know, what we have to offer as coaches are just some things to be aware of out there, but the execution and the success in the first 2 games is based on the players getting it done.
Go back to Jason Bell for a delayed follow-up. Go ahead, Jason.
I've always been a little delayed, so I appreciate that, Gregor. Just to, Paul, to the other point about the balance, you know, you could have been in a position where Josh Morrissey's got to run 30 minutes, but because of what your third pairing is doing, I mean, can you talk about what those 2 young fellows have done? Because I think they're Logan Stanley has certainly opened a lot of eyes over the course of the weeks and months, but the last 2 games in particular.
Yeah. Two young players in terms of games in the NHL, but both of them for big men skate very well. Tucker Poolman covers an awful lot of ice very, very quickly. They were both, you know, they're here to defend, and they can with size and with speed. But you know, Tucker scores the tying goal last game, and Logan shoots the puck on the game winner. So there's offense there, different kind. Tucker's good getting up the ice and making those kind of plays. And Logan does a great job getting pucks to the net, but that's not enough to keep them in the lineup and to make them valuable to us. What they've done well is they've closed ice, and they're both big, strong men, and they've killed plays in the corner. So they've yeah, I mean, they've played very well for us.
Oh, back to Ken Weaver from Sportsnet. Go ahead, Weaver.
Well, how would you describe the impact Josh Morrissey is having on this series?
Yeah, you know what? Those guys are so hard to handle, and it takes a lot of experience. So the one thing that Josh has is experience now defending against the best, and I think he's using that. His angles have been fantastic. When to close real hard and when to be patient and lay off and let the play develop, choke it off at the net. He made a great recovery last night in the 3rd period under heavy pressure, stopped it, pulled it off the wall, put it up the middle. So he's, you know, he's a veteran guy now. One of those players that kind of came in as a youngster and developed, and now he's playing against the world's best. And he's, you know, he's the one guy on our blue line that has that experience. He's been on the ice against those guys for the most part for his entire career.
And final question to Paul Friesen from the Winnipeg Sun. Go ahead, Paul.
Paul, your players talked a lot, said all the right things about belief heading in. What does win number 1 and then win number 2 do to that belief? And do you actually see it galvanizing? Are there signs of that?
Yeah, you're looking for it in consistency and decisions, right? And we haven't turned the puck over a whole lot. We've been patient in our game, not casual or slow, but we've been patient in our decisions, and that is, I think, where you see the players kind of adhering to playing one style of game and accepting the fact that it's not about points in the playoffs. It's about, it's about smart, hard hockey. And then being patient, then relaxing, just do that over and over again. So we haven't had a lot of aberration in terms of decisions on the ice. They've moved us 5 pretty darn well through 2. Winning a couple of games helps that continue. This series as all will continue to change. The first 2 games, the next game is not going to look like the last 2. They're going to have a different risk profile in their game. They'll become more dangerous as it goes. I mean, and then as we get closer and closer to game 7, that's the way the series is going to go.
We'll just go back to Paul Friesen for a follow-up. Go ahead, Paul.
Probably a question you've never had before. Is it the Zoom feed, or are you wearing a sparkling jacket?
There's no sparkle. I know it might be the lights in here, Paul. I might sue. Is it libel or slander? It would be slander.
No, it looks good.
Libel's the written word, slander's the verbal. Okay. Yeah, there's no sparkle in this jacket.
Okay.
There's actually no sparkle in my life, Paul. There's just no sparkle.